Robert Jensen, a journalism professor at the University of Texas, commonly conducts an experiment in his classroom exploring our culture's views on masculinity. He first describes a scenario in which they have a son who asks them what it means to be a man. He asks the class how they would respond and record what they say on the board in front of the classroom. Positive words like respectful, loving, courageous, and caring always fill the board. Jensen then divides the board and asks them to describe what they would say it means to be a man in an all-male peer setting, such as a locker room. The tone of the board suddenly turns to reflect themes of dominance, violence, and sexual aggression, with words such as aggressive, a player, and a thug to say for the vulgar. When the exercise is over, two completely contrasting groups of words fill the board, all reflecting what our society tells us it means to be a man.
I describe masculinity in society as an exterior that you have to lead on as being tough or strong, or that you just have power in general.
There still is in contemporary society the sense of hypermasculinity, which would be, a focus on physical power, a focus on hypersexuality among men.
You see the guys always being the heroes are white and shining armor. The ones who are feminine are portrayed as gay, fags.
In interpersonal situations, it kind of can turn into something that's totally unhealthy and abusive.
Most modern societies have some form of gender role. Some are stricter than others. Gender role definitely has a lot to do with it. From my work that I do personally and specifically, violence among youth specifically goes to reinforce gender role, first and foremost and most of all. Boys who do not display appropriate masculine characteristics are victimized at much, much higher rates than girls who display masculine characteristics.
What we know is that perpetrators really believe in rape myths. They believe the woman is asking for it. They believe if she's dressed a certain way that she deserves to be raped. If she got drunk at a party, she was asking for it. And they truly believe that they didn't rape somebody. And I think that because society feeds into that, and because what rape really does is it makes society have to choose sides. We have to believe one person or the other. And so the perpetrator doesn't have to do anything for us to believe him, because he's just feeding into the myths. Well, she got drunk and she led me on, or she dressed that way so she wanted it.
I used to work at Penn State, which is the largest fraternity and sorority system in the United States. It is possibly the most gendered place I've ever lived. And it was truly unbelievable to watch. But one of my undergraduates was in a rather large fraternity, and his fraternity brothers used to come by and ask me questions. I was their big sister of sorts who was going to tell them all the secrets about women and whatnot. And one time this guy came by, and in typical fraternity style, he was just like, "Man, I'm bringing this girl over tonight. I'm gonna get her so drunk so I can get laid." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you realize that in the state of Pennsylvania, what you've just said to me means that you have expressed an intent to rape a woman? And that if she reports you, I become a witness on the witness stand to say that you intentionally got her intoxicated in order to compromise her ability to consent to you having sex with her." I wouldn't consider that fraternity brother to be a sadistic rapist. He's just misinformed and is not thinking about what he's doing. I think when people think about rape and sexual assault, there's always that thing for children is stranger danger. The likelihood that a child is going to be assaulted by a stranger is pretty much slim to none. The likelihood that a child's going to be assaulted by a family member is pretty much 1 in 4. So I don't know if we should be saying daddy danger as opposed to stranger danger, or if we should just open up our minds and start realizing that what's going on happens close, and that's the most insidious part. It seemed like every semester I took a friend, a student, someone that I knew in for a sexual assault exam when I was in graduate school. It was like I was the sexual assault person, and everybody came to me when they had issues. And at least 3 of those people had consented to certain sexual activities with this person, and then they didn't want to go any further with whoever they were with. and got pushed way far beyond what they wanted, and they were high or they were drunk, or depending on what had happened to compromise their consent, or they were just scared, or they didn't, he was a lot bigger than she was. I mean, there's a lot of power issues that go on in terms of these things. I have been the victim of sexual assault on many different occasions and basically my entire childhood. And childhood process different from adult process, but I think there's a lot of grief that goes on, sort of a loss of safety, a loss of innocence, a loss of your self-image, going through all the processes of like, I don't believe this has happened to me, I'm really angry this has happened to me.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the most common things that happens when people are sexually assaulted. There are also psychological triggers, so that there's smells or sounds that again can send you into a panic. Anxiety is a typical result. And then beyond just psychologically, the blaming that people go through, the self-blame.
I think it depends upon what people's normal reaction to stress is, what their normal coping mechanism for stress is. Unfortunately, a lot of people's coping mechanisms for any kind of stress has to do with substance. So, using drugs, using alcohol to sort of numb the feeling, make it go away, and then that leads to its own issues, and that sort of works until it doesn't.
Ultimately, you're never the same person after a sexual assault. You are who you were before the assault happens, and then you are who you are now. One of the hardest hurdles to get over and to get through is the idea that they were somehow responsible, because everywhere around them, society's saying they were responsible, and images and what people talk about when they talk about sexual violence. We live in a society that tolerates rape, and I think that's the biggest issue. You may see a few stories about it, but usually there's some level of blaming of the victim.
I think victim blaming is just, especially in families, and when the sexual abuse is done by a family member, the rest of the family tends to blame the victim because they don't want to actually blame the actual person who is at fault. And we see victim blaming in a lot of ways. I think the clearest way to see it is the why questions. Why did you lead him on? Why did you decide to make out with him? Why did you let him touch you there? As if any of those things mean that you want to be raped.
If it's a woman, it goes back to what was she doing? Was she drinking? Was she acting a certain way? What was she wearing? All of those things, in a way, excuse the perpetrator.
It's easy to make it seem like she wanted it, or the person was just drunk and they accidentally tried going all the way or whatever. But there's really no excuse to do anything like that.